Right now, there's a version of you that exists in the future. This version trades without hesitation, exits without hope, follows their rules like breathing. And there's another version, the one that keeps breaking promises to themselves, that feels that sickening guilt after every revenge trade. Here's what nobody tells you. The difference between these two versions isn't what you think. It's not discipline. It's not intelligence. It's not even experience. It's something so simple that when I tell you, you might feel angry at how long you've been struggling unnecessarily. The traders who never break their rules have changed one specific relationship, and that's where we're going. You've been taught that rule breaking is a character flaw, that somewhere deep inside you, there's a weakness, a lack of discipline, a missing piece that other traders somehow have. And because you believe this, you've been trying to fix yourself with more willpower, more control, more promises that tomorrow will be different. But here's what I need you to understand. You're not broken. You've simply been using the wrong map. Every other approach to trading psychology treats rule breaking as a discipline problem and tries to solve it with more force. What I'm going to show you is completely different. The traders who never break their rules have fundamentally transformed their relationship with uncertainty itself, not strengthened their willpower. They've moved from controlling their behavior to understanding why their brain generates the urge to break rules in the first place. And once you see this, once you really understand what's happening inside your nervous system during those moments when you're about to override your plan, everything changes. You'll finally stop battling yourself. You'll understand that the effort you've been putting into discipline has actually been making your problem worse. This isn't about trying harder. It's about understanding deeper. And that understanding brings a kind of relief that willpower never could. So let me start with a story that's going to help you see your own trading in a completely different light. Imagine a pilot learning to fly through clouds. They're in training, and their instructor takes them up on a day when visibility is perfect. Everything makes sense. The nose goes up, they feel pressed into the seat, they're climbing. The nose goes down, they feel light, they're descending. Their body and the instruments agree. Life is simple. But then comes the day they have to fly through clouds. Thick, heavy clouds where you can't see anything. No horizon, no ground, no sky, just gray. And something strange starts happening. The instruments say they're climbing, but their body screams that they're diving. Every cell in their body feels the bank to the left, feels the nose dropping, feels the spiral starting, and the panic rises. Every instinct they have says, pull up, level the wings, trust what you feel. The urge is overwhelming. It feels like truth. It feels like survival. And here's the thing. If they listen to that feeling, if they override the instruments and pull up when they're actually climbing, they'll stall the plane and die. This isn't theory. This is how pilots die in clouds. It's called spatial disorientation, and it's killed thousands of pilots who were absolutely convinced with every fiber of their being, that their instruments were wrong and their gut was right. The instruments say one thing, the body feels something completely different. And the body feels so much more real, so much more urgent, so much more true. Now let me ask you something. When you're in a trade and your plan says, hold, but every cell in your body is screaming, get out, what's happening? When your system says, wait for confirmation, but the market is moving and you feel like you're missing it, what is that feeling? It's the same thing. You're in the clouds. Your trading rules are your instruments, and your nervous system is experiencing complete vertigo. The market creates the same sensory illusion that clouds create for pilots. Your gut screaming that you need to act now, exit early, add to a loser, skip the next setup because this one feels different. Your inner sense of what's safe and what's dangerous has become completely unreliable, but it feels more real than anything else in that moment. The traders who never break their rules haven't eliminated this feeling. That's what you need to understand. They still feel the vertigo. They still experience the overwhelming urge to override their plan. What's changed is their relationship with that urge. They've learned what pilots learn in instrument training, not to ignore the fear, but to recognize the feeling of vertigo as information rather than instruction. To say, there's that sensation again. That means I'm in the clouds and my instruments matter more than ever. See, the pilot doesn't stop feeling the disorientation. They learn to label it, to recognize it, to expect it. And in that recognition, the feeling loses its power to control behavior. They feel their body screaming, "Dive," and they think, of course you feel that. That's what bodies feel in clouds, but the instruments know something my body can't know right now. And they keep their hands steady. The traders who never break rules have learned the same recognition. They feel the urge, label it accurately, and let it pass without obeying it. The urge says, this loss is different. You need to hold it. And they think, of course my brain is saying that. That's what brains say when facing uncertainty. But my rule knows something my fear can't see right now. But here's where it gets even more interesting. How do pilots train for this? Do they sit in a classroom and learn about the importance of discipline? Do they make promises to themselves to try harder, to trust their instruments? Do they shame themselves for feeling the disorientation? No. They do something completely different. They practice recognition. They put themselves in situations where they experience the disorientation in small, safe doses. They learn what it feels like. They learn to expect it. They learn that the feeling will pass, that it's not dangerous, that it's just information about being in clouds. And slowly, over time, the panic lessens. Not because they've become more disciplined, but because their nervous system has learned that the feeling isn't a threat. This is what I mean when I say the traders who never break rules have changed a relationship. They're not fighting the urge anymore. They're not trying to overpower it with discipline. They've taught their nervous system something new about what that urge actually means. Let me give you another image, because I think this is so important and I want you to really see it. I used to think of my mind like a battlefield, me versus my impulses. Every broken rule was a lost battle, proof I was losing the war. And I would stand there in the aftermath of another broken promise, another trade I shouldn't have taken, another exit I shouldn't have made, and I would feel like a failure, like I was fundamentally flawed, like something was wrong with me that wasn't wrong with successful traders. Then someone showed me a different image, and it changed everything. They said, what if your mind isn't a battlefield? What if it's a garden? And at first, I didn't understand what they meant. But they explained it like this. In a garden, weeds don't grow because you're weak. They don't grow because you lack discipline or because you're a bad gardener. They grow because that's what gardens do. Seeds blow in on the wind. Birds drop them. They're in the soil already, waiting, and they grow. Now, you can stand in the middle of your garden screaming at the weeds. You can shame them. You can promise yourself you'll be more disciplined about stopping them. You can use all your willpower to rip them out one by one. And tomorrow, more weeds, and the next day, more weeds. And you get more and more exhausted, more and more frustrated, more and more convinced that you're just not cut out to have a garden. Or you can learn how gardens actually work. You can understand that weeds grow from seeds planted long ago, that they have root systems, that if you just rip off the top, the root stays and it grows back stronger. And you can start asking different questions. Not, why am I so weak that I have weeds, but where did this seed come from? What is this root system? What conditions am I creating that help this weed thrive? The urge to break your rules isn't a character flaw. It's a weed with a root system. And that root system was planted long ago, probably before you ever started trading. Maybe it was planted when you were a kid and you learned that mistakes mean you're bad. Maybe it was planted the first time you had a big loss and your brain decided that losses mean danger. Maybe it was planted when someone told you that successful people never fail, never feel fear, never struggle. I don't know what planted your seeds, but I know they're there. And the traders who never break rules have stopped fighting weeds and started pulling roots. They've asked themselves, where did this impulse get planted? What does it believe it's protecting me from? What old story am I believing when I feel the urge to override my plan? And when you understand the root, when you really see it clearly, the weed loses its power, not through force, not through discipline, through recognition, through understanding, through compassion, actually, through looking at that urge and saying, oh, I see you. I see what you're trying to do. You're trying to protect me from feeling stupid, from being wrong, from facing uncertainty. Thank you for trying to help, but I don't need that protection anymore. This is the shift. This is what changes. And it's not easy to explain because it's not about doing more, it's about understanding more. It's about seeing clearly instead of fighting blindly. So let me break down what these traders discovered inside themselves, because this is where it gets practical. This is where we move from metaphor to mechanism. There are some specific things happening in your brain and your nervous system when you're about to break a rule, and understanding these things changes everything. First, let's talk about the threat response. Your brain has one primary job: keep you alive. That's it. Everything else is secondary. And to do that job, your brain is constantly scanning your environment for threats. This happens automatically, unconsciously, faster than thought. It's handled by a part of your brain called the amygdala, and it's been keeping humans alive for hundreds of thousands of years. Now, here's what's important. When you experience uncertainty, which is every single trade you take, your amygdala goes into high alert. Uncertainty equals potential danger in the brain's ancient logic. And it starts scanning. What are the threats here? What could hurt me? What do I need to avoid? And if your trading rules have been associated with pain in the past, if following your stop loss has meant watching the stock reverse, if waiting for confirmation has meant missing moves, if any part of your system has been connected to the feeling of loss or regret or being wrong, your brain will categorize the rule itself as dangerous. Think about that. Your rule, the very thing that's supposed to protect you, becomes labeled as a threat. And when something is labeled as a threat, your brain's job is to get you away from it, to override it, to protect you from it. This is why you can know what to do and still not do it. This is why you can have a perfect plan and still break it. You're not overriding logic with emotion. You're experiencing a threat response that temporarily makes your rule feel more dangerous than breaking it. This isn't a character flaw. This is your nervous system doing its job based on the information it has. The problem is, the information is wrong, but your nervous system doesn't know that. It's just trying to keep you safe. So what do the traders who never break rules do differently? They've rewritten this association. They've taught their nervous system that the rule is safety, not threat. That following the plan, even when it feels hard, even when it means taking a loss or missing a move, that's actually the safest thing they can do. And they didn't do this through willpower. They did it through repetition and evidence. Every time you follow a rule and survive, you're giving your nervous system evidence. You're saying, see, I followed the stop loss. The stock did reverse, and I'm okay. I'm still here. I'm still trading. Following the rule didn't kill me. And slowly, over dozens and hundreds of repetitions, your amygdala starts to learn. It starts to reclassify. The rule moves from the threat category to the safety category. But here's the thing. This can't happen if you're inconsistent. If you follow your rule 10 times and break it once, you've just reinforced the original association. You've just told your brain, see, the rule is dangerous. That's why I had to override it. I was protecting myself. And the cycle continues. This brings me to the second big insight, and this one is a paradox. You can't discipline yourself into trusting your rules. Trust is earned through evidence, not effort. But here's the paradox. You need to follow rules to gather evidence, but you can't follow rules until you trust them. It's a catch-22. So how do you break the cycle? The answer is so simple that it feels almost insulting when you first hear it. You start with the smallest possible rule, something so low stakes, so easy, so non-threatening that your threat response doesn't even activate. Maybe it's just reviewing your journal every morning. Maybe it's waiting 5 seconds before you enter a trade. Maybe it's only trading in the first 2 hours of the day, something that your nervous system won't fight. And then you keep that promise. Every single day, no exceptions, no upgrades. Just that one boring, simple promise kept religiously for 30 days. And what you're doing is building a neural pathway of self-trust. You're showing your brain, look, when I say I'm going to do something, I do it. When I make a rule, I follow it. I am someone whose words and actions align. And once that pathway exists, once your brain has that evidence, you can start routing bigger rules through it. You can add a second rule, and then a third, and each time you're building on that foundation of trust. You're expanding the territory where your word means something to your nervous system. The traders who never break rules didn't conquer all their demons at once. They didn't wake up one day and suddenly become disciplined. They started with one tiny promise and kept it until it became boring, until it became automatic, until their brains stopped questioning whether they would do it and just expected that they would. Now let me talk about something that happens in the moment when you're feeling the urge to break a rule, because this is where most traders get lost. The urge arrives and it feels like truth. It doesn't feel like an urge or an impulse or a feeling. It feels like reality. It feels like insight. It feels like you're suddenly seeing clearly what you couldn't see before. The thought comes, this trade is different. I should exit now before it gets worse. And it arrives with complete conviction, with urgency, even with a kind of moral righteousness, like it would be stupid not to listen, like you'd be failing yourself if you followed the rule this time. And this is the trap, because feelings aren't facts. They're weather patterns. They're temporary states generated by your nervous system based on incomplete information and old associations. But they feel so real, they feel so true, they feel so much like you that you identify with them completely. The breakthrough happens when you can observe the urge without identifying with it, when you can say, there's anxiety, instead of, I'm anxious, when you can notice, my brain is generating the thought that I should exit, instead of I should exit. This sounds like a tiny semantic difference, but it's actually enormous, and it creates a gap, a space, a moment of separation between the impulse and the action, and in that gap lives freedom. Not the freedom to never feel the urge. You're probably going to feel urges for as long as you trade, but the freedom to feel the urge and choose differently. The freedom to say, I see you, urge, I feel you, I understand you're trying to protect me, and I'm going to follow my rule anyway. This is what I mean by changing the relationship. You stop trying to eliminate the feeling. You stop trying to be so disciplined that you never feel the urge. Instead, you learn to have the feeling and act differently anyway. You learn to let the feeling exist without letting it drive. Think about it like this. Imagine you're sitting by a river and you're watching leaves float by. Some leaves are beautiful, some are ugly, some are interesting, some are boring. But you don't jump in the river to grab them or push them away. You just watch them float by. That's what these traders have learned to do with urges. The urge floats by. They notice it. They might even say hello to it, and they watch it float past without jumping in. Now, there's another layer to this that I think is really important, and it has to do with identity. See, every time you break a rule, You're not just affecting that trade. You're not just losing money or missing an opportunity or creating a worse entry. You're doing something much more fundamental. You're reinforcing an identity. You're telling yourself a story about who you are. And the story goes like this. I'm someone who can't be trusted. I'm someone who breaks promises to myself. I'm someone who says one thing and does another. I'm someone who doesn't have what it takes. And every broken rule adds another chapter to that story. Another piece of evidence that the story is true. And the more you believe that story, the more you become it. Because your brain likes consistency. It likes for your behavior to match your beliefs about yourself. So if you believe you're someone who breaks rules, your brain will helpfully ensure that you continue breaking rules to maintain consistency. But here's the beautiful thing. It works in the opposite direction too. Every time you keep a rule, especially when it's hard, especially when every part of you wants to override it, you're authoring a different story. You're telling yourself, I'm someone who does what I say. I'm someone who honors my word. I'm someone my future self can count on. I'm someone who is becoming trustworthy to myself. And this is powerful. This is identity level change. The traders who never break rules have shifted their identity from someone trying to be disciplined to someone who honors their word. And once that identity shift happens, rule following stops being about the trade. It stops being about the money. It stops being about right or wrong. It becomes about integrity with self. It becomes about, this is who I am, this is what I do, this is how I operate in the world. And from that place, discipline becomes unnecessary. Because you're not fighting yourself anymore. You're not trying to force yourself to do something that goes against who you are. You're simply being who you are. And who you are is someone who follows their rules. Now, there's one more piece I want to talk about before we get into the practical steps. And this is about outcome versus process. This is about one of the biggest traps that keeps traders stuck in the rule-breaking cycle. Your brain wants to judge every rule by immediate results. This is completely natural. Your brain is a pattern recognition machine, and it's always trying to figure out what works and what doesn't based on what just happened. So you follow your stop loss, and the stock reverses immediately after you get stopped out. And your brain says, see, the rule was wrong. I should have held. I should have trusted my gut. Or you wait for confirmation like your system says, and the stock takes off without you. And your brain says, see, I missed it. I should have trusted my instinct. The rule is too conservative. And because your brain is making these judgments constantly, you start to lose faith in your rules. You start to doubt. You start to think maybe the rules are the problem. Maybe you need different rules. Maybe you need to be more flexible. And this is how you end up with rules that keep changing, systems that keep getting tweaked, and a complete loss of confidence in your methodology. But here's what the traders who never break rules understand at a deep level. They've divorced rule following from outcome judging. They've accepted a profound truth that most traders never fully internalize. You can follow perfect rules and lose. You can break rules and win. But only one of those paths leads to long-term consistency. Think about this. If you follow your rules perfectly for 10 trades and 8 of them are losers, did you do something wrong? Your brain wants to say yes. Your brain wants to blame the rules or blame you for following them. But the truth is, you might have done everything exactly right. The market just didn't cooperate. That's probability. That's how trading works. And if you break your rules, take a trade you shouldn't have taken, and it becomes your biggest winner of the month, did you do something right? Again, your brain wants to say yes. Your brain wants to reinforce that behavior. But you got lucky. You won in spite of breaking your rule, not because of it. And if you let that win teach you that breaking rules is sometimes smart, You've just planted a seed that will grow into a very destructive weed. The traders who never break rules have made peace with being wrong in the short term to be right in the long term. They've accepted that following rules means you're going to have trades that don't work, lots of them, and they've decided that's okay because they're not judging themselves by individual trades. They're judging themselves by whether they honored their process, and that peace, that acceptance, that's where discipline becomes unnecessary. When you're at peace with following your rules regardless of outcome, when you've truly internalized that the result of this one trade doesn't matter compared to the integrity of your process, the urge to break rules loses most of its power, because the urge is always about trying to control the outcome, trying to avoid a loss, trying to capture a win, trying to be right. And when you've let go of needing to control the outcome of individual trades, when you've accepted that your edge only shows up across hundreds of trades, the urge has nothing to grab onto. So let me make this practical now, because I know this is a lot of concepts and ideas, and you might be thinking, okay, I understand the theory, but what do I actually do? How do I start making this shift? And I'm going to give you 4 specific practices that you can start today. Not tomorrow, not when you feel more motivated. Today. The first practice is what I call the evidence journal, and it's extremely simple. For the next 2 weeks, keep a log. It can be on your phone, in a notebook, in a spreadsheet, wherever. And every single time you follow a rule, regardless of the outcome of the trade, you write one sentence: I kept my word. That's it. No analysis, no judgment of whether the trade made money, no second-guessing whether the rule was right, just acknowledgement. I kept my word. What you're doing here is training your brain to notice integrity, not results. You're teaching your nervous system to pay attention to the thing that actually matters for long-term success, which is process adherence. And over time, this simple act rewires the association between rules and self-trust. Your brain starts to recognize that following rules is something worth celebrating, something worth noticing, something that defines who you are. And here's what's interesting. After about a week of doing this, you'll probably notice that the act of writing "I kept my word" starts to feel good. It starts to give you a little hit of satisfaction. And that satisfaction is your reward system coming online in a new way. Instead of getting rewarded by outcomes, you're getting rewarded by integrity. And once that reward system shifts, everything else becomes easier. The second practice is what I call the urge observer. And this is for those moments when you're in a trade or about to enter a trade and you feel the impulse to override your plan. Maybe you're supposed to wait for confirmation, but you want to jump in. Maybe you're supposed to hold to your target, but you want to exit. Maybe you're supposed to take this setup, but it feels scary. Whatever the urge is, don't fight it. Don't try to suppress it. Don't shame yourself for feeling it. And also, don't obey it. Instead, name it out loud. Actually speak it. There's the urge to exit early. There's the fear that this will turn against me. There's the anxiety about missing this move. And then set a timer for 10 seconds. In those 10 seconds, you don't have to follow the rule. You just have to wait. You just have to create a gap between the impulse and the action. What you'll discover is that most urges lose about 80% of their power in 10 seconds of conscious observation. The urgency fades. The conviction softens. The feeling is still there, but it's not as overwhelming. And in that softened state, you have choice. You can still break the rule if you want to. Nobody's going to stop you. But now it's a choice, not a compulsion. And more often than not, you'll find yourself choosing to follow the rule. And even when you don't, even when you still break the rule after the 10 seconds, you've gained something valuable. You've experienced the urge consciously instead of automatically. You've created a little bit of space. And that space will grow over time until breaking rules becomes harder than following them. The third practice is what I call the tiny promise protocol. And this is about starting small in a way that your nervous system cannot fight. Choose your smallest, least emotionally charged rule, something that has almost nothing to do with money or winning or losing. Maybe it's reviewing your journal every morning before you trade. Maybe it's only checking your account at specific times. Maybe it's writing down your plan before you enter, something simple, something boring. And then keep that promise for 30 days. No exceptions, no upgrades, no expanding to other rules. Just this one thing, done, consistently, for 30 days. And what you're building here is the neural pathway of self-trust that I talked about earlier. You're proving to your brain that when you say something, you mean it, that your words have weight, that you are someone who can be trusted. And here's what I've seen happen over and over with traders who do this. They start with one tiny rule. They keep it for 30 days. And somewhere around day 20, they notice something strange. They notice that they're starting to follow other rules too, rules they didn't even commit to without trying. Because the identity has shifted. Because the pathway of self-trust has been built. And once that pathway exists, it wants to be used, it wants to expand. And suddenly, rule following becomes easier across the board. The fourth practice is what I call the future self-letter. And this one might sound a little unusual, but I promise you it's powerful. I want you to write a letter from your future self. Not the version of you that's struggling right now, but the version 6 months or a year from now who never breaks their rules. The version who trades with confidence and clarity and consistency. The version who has made the shift we've been talking about. And in that letter, I want your future self to explain to current you what changed. What did they finally understand? What burden did they put down? What realization made the difference? What does it feel like now to trade without fighting themselves? Write it in first person as if you are that future self. Be as specific and detailed as you can. Make it real. Make it vivid. Now, this isn't fantasy. This isn't wishful thinking. This is rehearsal. Your brain doesn't distinguish very well between vivid imagination and actual memory. When you write this letter from your future self, when you really step into that perspective and feel what it would feel like to be free of this struggle, you're creating a template. You're giving your brain a destination. You're showing your nervous system what we're moving toward. And that template becomes a kind of gravitational pull. It becomes something you're moving toward rather than something you're hoping might happen. I've had traders tell me that after writing this letter, they keep it somewhere they can see it. Some put it on their desk. Some keep it in their trading journal. Some read it every morning before they trade. And what it does is remind them of who they're becoming. It reminds them that the struggle isn't permanent. It reminds them that there's a version of them that already exists in potential, just waiting to be realized. Now, I want to acknowledge something. Everything I've shared with you today might feel overwhelming. You might be thinking, this is a lot. I don't know if I can do all of this. I don't know if I can make this shift. And I want to tell you something really important. You don't have to do all of this. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to change. Everything at once. Pick one thing, just one. Maybe it's the evidence journal. Maybe it's the 10-second pause. Maybe it's the tiny promise. Pick the one that resonates with you, the one that feels doable, the one that creates a little spark of hope or curiosity. And start there. Just start there. Because here's what I've learned after decades of working with traders, after decades of studying this, after decades of struggling with this myself. Change doesn't happen through massive overhauls. It doesn't happen through sheer force of will. It doesn't happen by trying to become a different person overnight. It happens through small shifts that compound, through tiny promises kept, through moments of awareness that accumulate into transformation. The traders who never break their rules didn't get there by being superhuman. They got there by being human in a different way, by being gentle with themselves, by being curious about their urges instead of ashamed of them, by building trust slowly instead of demanding it immediately, by understanding that their brain is doing its best to protect them, even when that protection creates problems. And you can do the same thing. You can make this shift, not because you're going to become more disciplined, but because you're going to become more understanding, more aware, more integrated. You're going to align your actions with your intentions, not through force, but through clarity, not through fighting yourself, but through finally being on your own side. Let me bring this home. We started with two versions of you, one that breaks rules and feels guilt, one that follows rules and feels free. And I told you the difference wasn't what you thought. And now you know what it is. It's not discipline. It's not character. It's not some mysterious quality that some people have and others don't. It's a relationship with uncertainty, a relationship with urges, a relationship with yourself. The traders who never break their rules have transformed that relationship. They've moved from fighting to understanding, from forcing to allowing, from shame to curiosity, from judgment to compassion. They've stopped treating their urges as evidence of weakness and started treating them as information about their nervous system. They've stopped trying to eliminate feelings and started learning to have feelings without being controlled by them. They've stopped measuring themselves by outcomes and started measuring themselves by integrity. They've stopped believing that discipline is about force and started understanding that true discipline is about alignment. And here's what I need you to hear, what I really need you to take with you from this. You are not broken. You have not failed. Your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do, protect you from perceived threat. The urge to break rules isn't evidence of weakness, it's evidence of a nervous system trying to keep you safe using outdated information, using associations that were formed in pain, using threat responses that made sense at the time but don't serve you anymore. Your only job now is to update that information, to show your brain through small promises kept and urges observed that your rules are not the threat. Rule breaking is, that uncertainty isn't danger, that following your plan, even when it's hard, even when it means taking a loss or missing a move, that's actually the safest thing you can do for your long-term success. And when you do this, when you make this shift, you won't become more disciplined. You'll become free. Free from the constant battle with yourself. Free from the guilt and shame that comes after every broken rule. Free from the exhausting cycle of promising and failing and promising again. You'll trade from a place of clarity instead of conflict, from integrity instead of willpower, from trust instead of force. And that freedom is what's waiting for you, not someday, not when you finally get disciplined enough. But as soon as you're willing to change your relationship with what's happening inside you, as soon as you're willing to be curious instead of judgmental, as soon as you're willing to understand instead of fight. If something in this conversation landed for you, if you felt something shift in how you see your own struggle, let me know in the comments below. Tell me which insight hit you hardest. Tell me which practice you're going to start with. Tell me about your experience with rule breaking and what you're learning about yourself. I read every comment. I learned from them. I'm genuinely curious about your journey. And if this approach to trading psychology resonates with you, if you want to keep exploring these ideas, consider subscribing to this channel. There's a lot more where this came from, more insights into the mind of the trader, more practices for building trust with yourself, more ways to understand what's really happening when you trade. But more importantly, right now, today, go keep one small promise to yourself, just one. Choose the smallest, easiest rule you have and follow it. Not to prove anything, not to start a streak, not to become disciplined, just to show your nervous system that you're trustworthy. Just to author one sentence in the new story of who you're becoming. That's where everything changes. That's where the transformation begins. Not in the big dramatic moments, not in the promises to never break another rule, but in the quiet, simple act of keeping one small promise, and then another, and then another. Until one day you realize that the person who used to struggle with discipline is gone, and in their place is someone who just naturally follows their rules because that's who they are now. The traders who never break their rules aren't superhuman. They're not more gifted than you. They're not stronger or smarter or more talented. They just stopped fighting a battle they were never meant to win through force. They put down the sword. They picked up understanding instead. And now it's your turn to do the same. You've got this. Not because you're going to try harder, but because you're going to understand deeper. Not because you're going to force yourself, but because you're finally going to be on your own side. And from that place, everything becomes possible. Now go trade. Go keep one promise. Go start becoming the version of you that already exists, just waiting to be realized. I'll see you in the next one.